Hi, leaders. My name's Simone. I was just wondering, my husband's a teacher and he is working for the Department of Education. He always gets contracts renewed, but it seems like permanency is really hard to get with teachers. I was just wondering what your policies are for our teachers.
I might go first this time, if that's all right, Kieran. Yeah. We've got a policy to increase the rate of permanency of teachers in South Australia to address that exact issue, because at the moment, nobody wins. The teacher loses because they don't have permanency, which means it compromises their ability to have a decent standard of living. But just as importantly, the students lose because we see principals having to do all sorts of extraordinary acts to try and manufacture a circumstance where a contract teacher stays and they can't make them permanent. So we've come up with a policy that isn't universally supported, mind you. There's an element of controversy to it. We've come up with a policy where we're going to give principals more autonomy to choose who works in their schools. But the quid pro quo is that we're going to dramatically increase the rate of permanency in our schools. And it's all part of our 7-point plan to improve teaching quality. Here is a fact that most people don't realise. On average, school-age performance academically in Australia is going backwards, not just relative to the rest of the world, but relative to ourselves. If you finish school today, you are more likely to have a worse educational outcome than what would have been the case if you finished the school 15 years ago. Now, that's not the Premier's fault. It's not the former Labor government's fault. It's not the federal or state, one side or the other. This is a collective responsibility that all governments have to acknowledge. And if we don't start turning the dial on our educational performance, in 20 years' time, when the next generation of our children are trying to participate in the labour market, they're not going to be competing with their friend down the street. They're going to be competing with someone overseas. And we've got to start making some step change, some bold policy decisions to invest in that precious resource. And I've got a very substantial education policy, starting from 3-year-old preschool, which I'd love to get the opportunity to talk about, right through to the university sector to try and make those changes. But teaching quality is central to it, and permanency improves teaching quality.
Let's hear from the Premier.
Well, I'm very glad to be talking about teachers. They've done an extraordinary job over a very difficult 2-year period. Our students in South Australia have had more face-to-face contact than anywhere else in the country, and that's something that every parent, teacher, principal and student could feel very proud about. And we'll feel the benefit of that, I think, for years and years to come. But let's be very clear. When we came to government, education in South Australia was broken. The NAPLAN test, and I'm the first to admit it's not all about the NAPLAN test, but it's a very strong indicator. We were bottom or second to bottom in most of the NAPLAN test categories. We have transformed education since coming to government. We're already heading up that leader board in South Australia. We implemented compulsory phonics checks for all Year 1 students in South Australia, a policy which is now being taken up by New South Wales. We've moved Year 7s over to secondary school in South Australia. We'd signed up to the national agreement that had Year 7 at secondary school, but we'd never made that move in South Australia. It was an expensive move. We've most recently spent $1.4 billion upgrading our educational facilities across South Australia. 100 schools got massive upgrades. We've built 4 brand new schools in South Australia, and we've got another upgrade and another brand new school to be built. We've gone from the slowest, least reliable internet connection of anywhere in the country to the fastest and most reliable by putting our education system first. There's been a massive transformation, but there is still so much more work to be done. And again, we go back to this central point. If you've got a strong and growing economy, you can continue to invest in upgrading education facilities, health facilities in South Australia, community sporting infrastructure, and of course, road and rail.